Imagine tearing down your entire house to sell the bricks, but you tell the city inspector, I'm just doing a really aggressive kitchen remodel.
Right. Yeah, it's a great analogy because that is exactly what seems to be happening over at Picton Terminals.
Yeah, because on paper, it's just a shipping port.
Right. But in reality, it's allegedly operating as this massive, unlicensed, like $60 million plus quarry.
60 million. Wow.
Yeah, and they're doing it by utilizing a very specific legal loophole to basically just, bypass environmental and zoning protection.
Which is our mission today, right? To unpack this whole pattern where these multi-million-dollar aggregate contracts seem to be the actual driving force behind what the terminal just calls site improvements.
Exactly. And the scale of this operation really becomes obvious when you look at how they respond to, well, direct legal boundaries.
Yeah, you'd think a massive operation working in the legal gray area would try to, I don't know, stay under the radar. Especially since a judge explicitly told them to keep heavy industry off a specific parcel of land.
Right, you would think so. But back in 2018, the Ontario Superior Court ruled that the rural zone part of the property, the Sophiasburg portion, absolutely could not be used for industrial operations.
Or aggregate stockpiling, right?
Right.
Like the restrictions on that RU1 rural zone were crystal clear.
Crystal clear. Yet, despite the owner, Ben Dornkamp, publicly telling Global News that they are in full compliance and, they don't store equipment there, drone imagery just shows the exact opposite.
Wait, what exactly did the drones catch?
Well, sitting squarely in that restricted rural zone are heavy industrial vehicles, massive mounds of aggregate, huge piles of bauxite.
Bauxite, that's the aluminum ore, right?
Yeah, exactly. And on top of all that, a massive mobile rock crusher.
Okay, so if there's literal visual proof of a rock crusher sitting right where a judge explicitly said there shouldn't be one,
Right.
how does a company avoid enforcement? I mean, they are processing rock right out in the open.
So this is where the mechanics of Ontario's Aggregate Resources Act come into play. Under normal circumstances, if your primary business is mining and selling rock, you are subject to incredibly strict environmental and zoning permits.
Which, yeah, that makes total sense.
But there is an exception. If your primary goal is constructing a building and you just happen to need to remove rock to lay the foundation, that excavation isn't technically considered a quarry.
It falls under what's called the site improvement exemption.
Exactly. You basically tell the regulators, hey, I'm not mining rock. I just need to dig a really big hole for this building, and selling the rock is just a happy accident.
A very lucrative happy accident, which brings us to the infamous salt bin.
Right. So on a section of the property known as Block B, Picton Terminals excavated rock for 7 continuous years.
70 years, just digging a hole.
Yeah. And their stated justification for this multi-year dig was that they were building a dry storage salt bin.
Wait, they spent 7 years digging a hole for a salt bin? The 72-story first Canadian place in Toronto took 3 years to build.
I know, it's wild. And the sheer volume of rock they extracted wildly exceeds any conceivable local demand for salt storage.
So the timeline alone basically screams that extracting and selling the stone was the primary economic goal, right? Not just an incidental byproduct of building a storage shed.
Definitely. And the true underlying economics become even more obvious when you contrast that sluggish 7-year dig with another project on the exact same site.
Right, the grain terminal in Block F.
Yes. So in early 2024, the terminal qualified to bid on a major environmental cleanup called the Randle Reef Remediation Project.
Okay, so a big contract comes up.
Exactly. And suddenly they announce a new grain terminal, they begin blasting immediately, and in just 6 weeks they excavate and deliver 150,000 tons of aggregate to the reef.
Wow, 6 weeks versus 7 years.
Yeah, the rapid 6-week timeline just proves they were rushing to fulfill this massive aggregate contract for the Randle Reef project.
So the lucrative contract clearly drove the excavation, with the planned grain terminal just serving as the necessary alibi, basically.
Exactly. It's an alibi to utilize that site improvement loophole and bypass standard mining oversight.
So why should this matter to you as a listener? I mean, this whole situation highlights a massive vulnerability in our zoning and environmental protections.
It really does. It shows how easily millions of tons of earth can be legally moved and millions of dollars made if regulatory bodies just take these site improvement claims at face value.
Right, without ever actually investigating the underlying economics of what's happening.
Yeah, when the tail of aggregate contracts is wagging the dog of port development, the intended protections of the Aggregate Resources Act are completely neutralized.
Totally neutralized. If regulators aren't checking whether the primary business is actually building a port or just selling the ground underneath it, the extraction is just going to continue.
Oh, without a doubt.
So we'll leave you with this to ponder today. If a multi-million-dollar quarry can operate in plain sight simply by calling itself a port in transition, what other massive industrial operations in your own region might be hiding in plain sight behind the label of future development?